Welcome to the Africa in Harlem video podcast. I'm Issa. Today's guest is Fatou Wage, who is a member of the Gambian community living in the Bronx. She is the family member of two of the 17 victims of the Twin Parks fire. She is the family member of Haji Jawara and Aissatou Jabi, who were a couple and who lost their lives in the fire. I was shocked this week when Fatou Wage gave a speech during the one-year anniversary, and she mentioned that her four cousins who are currently in the Gambia weren't able to come to the U.S. because their caregiver, their grandmother, who is the mother of Aissatou Jabi, who passed away, weren't given a visa. I remember last year during the funeral, Senator Schumer was there, and he promised that the embassy in Gambia, the U.S. embassy in Gambia, was closed, and they would reopen it and give a visa to any family member wishing to come to the U.S. It seems that it is not what really happened. So we're going to listen to Senator Schumer and what he said, and we'll come back to the conversation.
We have to do much more to help our immigrant families, our Gambian families, our Bronx families to be able to climb the ladder that so many other Americans have climbed in the past. And I pledge to do everything I can at the federal level to make that happen. One bit of news for the families. Congressman Torres and I worked. The embassy in Gambia was closed because of COVID. We asked them to open, they are opening, and the families in Gambia who wish to come here and be with all of you in these very, very difficult times will start coming early this week. So they will be able to come and grieve with all of you. Let me just say this. Let me say this. We in America have to believe in our immigrant communities.
Thank you.
I actually wrote the law, the diversity visa law that allowed so many Africans to come here, and we are proud of you. And you are part of New York, and part of America, and part of the Bronx, and we stand by with you in times of tragedy, but also every other day to make your lives better and to allow you to climb that ladder and achieve the wonderful American dream. God bless you all.
This is what Senator Schumer said last year. So after that speech, walk us through the process of maybe your family and other families trying to bring family members here.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Isu, for having me, and thank you for this space to speak about this issue that's very important in my family and the community. But after, even before Schumer publicly announced that in the janaza, like family members were were told through advocates and other lawmakers, including Senator Schumer, that they will be able to have a process to bring their deceased loved ones over. Initially, the plan was to bring them over for the janaza, which took place, I think, about like a couple of days after the fire. But most of the families weren't able to, most of the families, including my family, did submit their immediate applications to get their visa to be able to come into the janaza, but no one approved their visa. I think it was only like one family member that was actually for another family that was able to come, but there was many applications were submitted. Like I would say probably over like 10 to 12 applications were submitted, but of that, only one, there were even probably close to like 20 applications, honestly, but only one person was accepted visa. And then afterwards, the plan was if the families can't make it to the janaza, to at least be able to have them come to the 40-day Islamic rituals after the passing of the deceased. Again, the same situation. I think only for the Ducre family, they were the only ones that were granted their visas to come. And I think probably like 4 families of the Ducre family, and the Ducre family is the one where both the mom and dad, and I believe their 3 young kids, all deceased in the fire. And I think only 3 to 4 of those family members were able to come. And then we had the whole situation where the embassy was closed. It was closed and delayed in response. And families, again, including my family, submitted their applications in to get their visas granted. And then most of the families were not given notification in time for the janaza prayer. Sorry, for the 1 year anniversary. So as it stands right now, like my family does have an interview date in March, and we will see what happens then. But I think from the very start of it all, when Senator Schumer made that promise to the families, and the families of the loved ones were back home, and this was a big tragedy. It not only hit our small community, our small Gambian community in the Bronx, it was a national tragedy. And for families to be stuck back home and not be able to come here and get some sort of closure over a year now for their families, especially thinking of my cousins who are still trapped back home, is something that's really hard and emotionally difficult. And I think one of the most frustrating part about it is that most of the families that got denied, like, we all received like a very generic letter that the embassy gives to everyone on your application being denied. And I think there was like a heightened standard also in showing that, like, once the families do come here, that they will return. And I think that has, like, its own like immigration politics when you think about it as well. And the families were like also having to show like bank statements that they were financially stable back home. And I think when you think about some of the circumstances of some of the family members, that might be very difficult for them to be able to prove. And most of our community, even back home, is unbanked as well. But the hope now is that, like, once the March interview date comes, like, especially with my grandma, that has the interview date set, that hopefully her application can be approved. And we have been speaking with the mayor's office and the Bronx Borough President's office, who have also been very supportive on this. But as you know, immigration is primarily a federal issue, and then on top of that is also left to the discretion of the embassy. So there's just like a lot of like immigration loopholes and politics involved. But the hope is that her visa will be approved so that my 4 cousins, all American citizens, can be able to come here and find some closure for themselves, and be able to be in community with their neighbors or families from 333 East 181st Street, to get the support that they need to move on from this all and find healing in it as well.
How old are they? So you mentioned that they are American citizens stuck in the Gambia because then their grandmother, who's not an American citizen, wasn't allowed a visa last year when it occurred, and also this year for the 1 year anniversary. And I have to remind people that every time you put up an application at the U.S. Embassy, there are fees that go with that application. So I know that in Senegal, in Seifa, it's around, it was, I don't know now, but it used to be about 100,000 Seifa. And looking at the dollar, it's about $200, depending on where the dollar is. So if there were about 20 applications, it's $200 for families that are trying to come because there is a tragedy, and you make them go through that process. You make a promise. So when they go to the embassy, they hopeful that they're gonna get these documents because this is tragic. They lost the family members. They want to be able to come. The only thing, your only concern is, will they return?
Exactly.
Right? And that's the reason why these people were denied a visa. But on the other hand, The U.S. has opened its doors to countless refugees coming from many places. And we're not saying that it's the case right now in the Gambia, because right now the Gambia is peaceful, but this is not an ordinary situation, and these families should have been granted a visa, not this year, but last year. So those 20 families put out an application to about $200. If it's what's the same fee then in Senegal, about $200. Didn't do it again this year. They ask about all these paperwork to be able to come here. I don't know.
I agree, Isu. I think luckily with the fees of helping us cover the fees for the application, Gambian Youth Organization, and I forgot another community-based group. Forgot the name of it, unfortunately. Sorry.
Was it MCN?
Not MCN. Another group helped us with covering the cost for the application fees. And the mayor's office, I believe it was the mayor's office, also did say that they will help with paying for flights and accommodations for the families once they do arrive here. So we are very grateful for that. But I think the main thing, as you said right now, is for the families to actually be able to come. And in regards to my cousins, the oldest is 16, and the youngest is 8 or 9. Always escapes my mind. And then I think the other two are about like 12 and 14, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty young children.
You said you were working with the Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson and also Mayor Eric Adams' office. Have you reached out to Senator Schumer and say, listen, this is the promise you made. This is what is currently happening. What can you do for us?
Yes, I know our advocates, in particular, like our advocates with Gambian Youth Organization. We also had a staff member from Undocu Black that was very supportive in the legal process. I know in the very beginning, there was like open channels with the office on, like supporting us in the process. But then, as I said, it's like, it becomes like a whole immigration loophole. And I think this, as someone who's a lawyer, I think this is like, and I remember in my law school classes, like we read about like how our immigration system, you can literally get lost in it and is a maze in and of itself. I think that really elucidated that for me, like this whole process. Because it's like Schumer made the promise, Schumer has leverage, but then at the same time, it's like the Gambian embassy itself is like it's at the embassy's discretion. So it's just like a whole gambit of things. And it's sad to see that the families are getting lost in this process, considering the systemic issues that even led to this fire. So it's like just thinking about like sort of like the double challenge that Black bodies and Black immigrants continue to face overall. It's something that's like, quite disheartening when you think about it.
Salim Drame, who is the president of the Gambian Youth Organization, during his speech, spoke about accountability. What does it look like for the family members? What would you like to see happen?
For sure. I would say one, it looks like making sure that incidents like these never repeat themselves. I think when you even look at the history of fires in the Bronx, you'll find that this isn't new. This is like a systemic issue that continues to reoccur in our neighborhoods, specifically neighborhoods of Black and brown bodies with immigrants, low-income neighborhoods that continue to be disinvested in. I think even the year like last year, there were about like 4 or 5 other fires that happened in the Bronx that were just as deadly, not to the same tragic level, but resulted in the loss of lives. And I think when you think about this, shows that there's poor management with the landlords, and there's also like a larger issues that our politicians can be able to step forth and make sure that housing is addressed accurately for our people. I think in that same token, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that these communities do not aren't forgotten, aren't left behind. And I think when you look at the way in which like our communities are like overly policed, but then we don't have resources when it comes to like education or like we're dealing with like other environmental challenges or I think overall, like we need to have more attention and more care brought into our community. We can't be. I think for too long, the Bronx overall has been the forgotten borough in many ways, and I think we can't continue to be that way. And I think Salim really accurately said this, and he even brought it in with an Islamic lens, where he said that you know at the end of times, like um, um, like our creator will ask us all, what do we will ask our leaders, like I gave you the tools, the knowledge, the people to lead. What did you do with that? Did you do good with that? And I think it's specifically a call to our leaders, like those who we look to for representation and for power to make sure that they aren't forgetting our communities. And I think lastly, just helping the families find closure. And I think one of the best ways for that is for our families who are back home who have not, and with the way immigration is, like once you move to the US or it's sometimes very difficult for you to, be able to get your documentation and be able to go back. So for most of these families, they probably haven't seen their loved ones in years, like 20 plus years. Like you have people who live here and have been undocumented for so long and are able to see their loved ones. So to think about the level of level of catastrophe this tragedy was, and to be able to like to not see your family in like 10 plus years, 20 plus years, and not be able to have any closure. And so I think just being able to come here and to have that closure that they need would be very, very important as well.
There was an ethnic media roundtable with the mayor a week ago, and I asked a question about accountability, and he explained how most of the victims who wanted to be relocated are are now placed in somewhere else, usually in nice new buildings
Yeah, in the Bronx.
in the Bronx, but what a high cost, right?
It had to take that.
Why did it take a fire for that to happen? And I explained also the difficulty that African immigrants in general have finding good, decent housing in the city. Housing is the main issue for many New Yorkers. It's more dire for African immigrants. And to see that happening now, because they had to almost lose their lives in a fire or had family members that lost their lives, to be able to get into a good, decent building with heat and everything that they need to live a decent and healthy life. What a cost.
I agree, Isu. And even more unique about our African families, and I've seen this like a lot with like working with Gambian Youth Organization and some of the advocates we're making with the whole fire relief, is that uniquely our families tend to be quite big. For example, my family lives in a building that is owned by the same management of 333 East 184th Street. And there are also many Africans in the neighborhood. And, our families tend to have like, 5, 6 children, or like minimum, like most of the times, like 3 to 4 bedrooms or even 5 bedrooms are what would adequately be able to house as well. And I think that was one of the reasons why buildings like 333 East 184th Street have such a large African community, because the apartments, the sizes of the apartments are able to accommodate us more. And I think when you see with a lot of the new affordable housings that are coming up, most of them are capped at like 3 bedrooms. Like you see some that are at like 4 or 5, but not much. Most are like at 3 bedroom. And in this process, when I was with Gambian Youth Organization, helping the families get relocated, it was so hard for most of the family members who lived in like 4, 5 bedrooms to be able to find apartments, because most of the time they were trying to like downsize them. So like, let's say someone who lived in a 5 bedroom, they were like trying to give them a 3 bedroom. And then also with like issues with like, documentation status as well. Like there will be family members who were living in the building and was there at the time of the fire, but their names were not on the lease. And also having to support. And I think that's another issue that's more unique to like our community. And that was also another thing that came up through the process that was a challenge as well. And making sure that like, with the relocation efforts for the families, that they were, making sure everyone was accounted for, and making sure that they were actually in decent sized apartments that will be able to accommodate everyone.
Mhm. Because as Africans, our families are not
Hmm.
mommy, daddy, and the dog,
Exactly.
or
Extends.
mommy and daddy, one or two
Hmm.
children and the dog. It's
Yeah.
not.
Extends.
And it's not just the African immigrants or the
Hmm.
African immigrant families. We see other communities where,
I agree.
um, the families are bigger
Hmm.
than
Hmm.
what we usually see. And we don't necessarily see those issues there. So I think there is something about the Black body that you mentioned
Hmm.
earlier, and the lack of value in the
Hmm.
system's eyes, right? If you look at the history of our ancestors who were kidnapped and brought in this country and what
Hmm.
they went through, to the point that now, as African immigrants, we are coming here and be
Hmm.
able to benefit in a certain way,
Hmm.
and try to build a better life. It's because those African Americans fought
Hmm.
for a very long time for all the rights that we have. And the fight is not
Exactly.
over.
It's definitely not. Definitely.
It's not over. And
Hmm.
also, as African immigrants, we have to play our part,
I
right?
agree.
And these kind of tragedies, because sometimes I see that when we come, we isolate sometimes, and we tend sometimes to unfairly look down at some of them because
Hmm.
because we don't necessarily understand
Hmm.
structural racism and how we got here, right?
Hmm.
When you are in Africa, I was introduced to the African American culture through music, right? Through hip hop,
Hmm.
Michael Jackson, and also sports, because I love track.
Hmm.
And when you're in Africa, you have this image of the African American succeeding, making it, right?
Hmm.
Because that's all you see, the entertainers, the athletes. You don't necessarily hear about the ghettos and the projects and sometimes the dysfunction that goes there, right?
I agree.
That is going on there. And so when you come here as an African immigrant, you're shocked by what you
Hmm.
see. And sometimes when you don't understand how they got here, got to that
Hmm.
point, I think it's easy sometimes to be very judgmental.
Hmm.
But when these type of tragedies happen, we realize that at the end of the day, whether we are descendants of kidnapped Africans or immigrants that came recently, at
Hmm.
the end of the day, we all Black. And the
Exactly.
system sees you
Mhm.
as a Black body, and it will
Exactly.
treat you the way
Mhm.
it treats every Black body.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree, and I think you said that so beautifully and like so spot on. And I think that is where like I feel like I think a lot about like my own experience, like as someone who is the daughter of Black immigrants, but then grew up in neighborhoods, predominantly like African American neighborhoods with other Afro Latinx communities, like Afro Caribbean communities. And I think that's where people like us are the bridge in helping like close those gaps that exist between our like our two communities. And I think it's definitely something like being in the organizing space, to being in the community advocacy space, that I tend to see as an issue. And I think one thing that makes me very helpful is that I feel like the younger generation has been helping in closing that void up and bringing up conversations more around that issue, because um, it's really important. And I think if anything, like Black Lives Matter movement demonstrates that, like, at the end of the day, like we're all like we are all like victims to the same policing practices. Like we had Amadou Diallo, who was shot and killed. We have Sean Bell. We had so many of these individuals, all Black. Didn't even matter, whether they
Mohammed
were,
Ba,
just
right here
Muhammad Ba.
in Harlem.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like a whole list of them. And I think that really demonstrates your point. So I agree with you so much.
Mhm. So now, what is your hope after the
Hmm.
1 year anniversary? We saw also that there was a street naming ceremony, right?
Hmm.
Which is beautiful. And I was interviewing Imam Kaba yesterday, and he said this was the first time he saw the name of an African on the
Yes.
street, right? So it's
Hmm.
beautiful, but we don't want it to be limited to the symbolic side, right?
Hmm.
Where, the same way when we were painting the Black Lives Matters on the
Hmm.
streets, right? But then again, where do we go
Yeah.
after that, beyond, that co-naming ceremony, and for the Gambian community, for the African immigrant community, for the Black and brown people
Hmm.
who are often victims of the system.
Hmm. Definitely. I think my hope is that we get we get better representation in more spaces of power. And I think we're continuing to have like a crop of like first gen um first gen uh, Gambian Americans, Senegalese Americans, Guinean Americans, Malian Americans, just first gen folks who are children of Black immigrants, who are um, continuing to elevate in their own respective professions and careers. And I hope with that comes more of us in spaces of power. And with that comes more eye towards our community and more decision making power and more policy making power that is reflective of the needs of our community. And I hope with that we are able to address many of the systemic issues that continue to happen in our community. And my hope is also that, like similar to what we were saying, that the bridges that there's more bridge building in between all of our communities, between the Latinx community, the African American community. Like there is more coalition building power amongst all of us who are often like victims to these same systemic issues, because with that collective power comes even more power, and comes making sure that tragedies that like 333 hopefully won't happen again. And my hope is that like I think one thing that I've definitely um found in my work in this fire tragedies, and having like my own family that's been impacted by, is just like like there's so much beauty in humanity. And I think sometimes I I can easily forget that, or like especially when you're like dealing with like a lot of these challenges that are like very real and seem to be never ending and daunting. But one thing that I often think about is like the first day that the fire happened, I was at MS 391. I was with Salem, Ajifanta, and Aminata and Jahira, all who are Gambian Youth Organization members. And we were at the middle school, and then we also were at the GYO Center. And I just remember people literally coming from all over, like, and from different faith backgrounds, like different ethnic backgrounds, just bringing stuff, bringing food, bringing just bringing their love and prayers and everything. And I think that's something that like really touches me, and it just shows like how much love and positive light was being poured into our community. Because I think I don't know, our elders have been like, it's like their blessings being reaped, and I hope that that is something that can always like continue on, because I think we are like, you know, we are a beautiful community, and we have like our positivity, and it's beautiful to see like humanity coming together as one. And the city itself, I think that's one thing I love about being a New Yorker, is like New Yorkers, like we always pull through and support each other, um, which is beautiful to like witness.
Thank you so much, Fatu, for being with us. And I know that it's not always easy to talk about it because, you know, it's fresh. It's just been a year and it's painful. But I hope, I really hope that the U.S. Embassy in the Gambia will do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that Senator Schumer will keep his promise.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that the Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson and Mayor Eric Adams will put some pressure. We know that it's a federal issue, but we'll put some pressure to allow these families to come. That's the least that they can do.
Mm-hmm. I hope so too.
Thank you, Fatu, for taking the time to talk to us. This is Isa from Africa in Harlem. Today's guest was Fatu Wage, a member of the Gambian community and a family member of Haji Jawara and Isa Tujabi, who perished during the Bronx fire last year, January 9, 2022. And still, the four children of this couple are unable to come to America because their caregiver, the grandmother, the mother of Isa Tujabi, was denied visa, not once, but twice. If you can do something, please help us bring these families here. Thank you again for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you can, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fatu.
Thank you, Isu.